Thank you for joining me for the monthly Microsoft Security Webcast. I'm Mike Nash, and I run the Security Business Unit here at Microsoft. As most of you know, this monthly webcast is an opportunity for us to keep you, our customers, up to date on what Microsoft's doing throughout the company to improve security, but also to update you on new guidance and tools and technology that are being made available to keep your organization safer and more secure. This webcast is designed to be very much a two-way dialogue, so I encourage you to engage with us during the webcast by asking questions using the Q&A link at the bottom of your screen. We'll answer questions during the final 15 minutes or so of the webcast. We have a group of folks here helping me today who will be answering your questions as well. So if we don't get a chance to answer all of your questions on the air, we'll be responding to other answers using the messaging UI that's part of the screen you're looking at right now. Of course, as always, if you have any need to contact me to give us feedback or to ask a question after the webcast, please feel free to email me directly. My email is Mike Nash, that's MikeNash, at Microsoft.com. We have a lot to cover today. First, I'm going to give you an update on the progress we've made on security at Microsoft since last month's January webcast. Then we'll be joined by two special guests. First is Chris Jones, Corporate Vice President of the Windows Core Operating System Division. And the second is Michael Howard, author of Writing Secure Code 2.0. So let's get started. There's certainly been a lot of questions and progress made around security at Microsoft over the last few months. The first thing I want to share information with you on is a new tool available on Microsoft.com called MBSA, or the Microsoft Baseline Security Analyzer 1.2. I mentioned this briefly in last month's webcast. This is now available on Microsoft.com at www.microsoft.com/MBSA. The cool thing about MBSA 1.2 is we now have coverage for a more complete set of technologies that are part of Windows. We also have support for Office, as well as many of the products that are part of the Windows Server system, including Exchange, SQL Server, and of course Windows Server. In addition, we've now localized MBSA into a number of languages, including Japanese and German. I'm also excited to announce that ISA Server 2004 is now available in beta. You can get information about ISA Server 2004 up on the Microsoft.com/ISA Server ISA website. Very important advances made there, primarily focusing on easier manageability and deployment, but also making sure we can use ISA Server to help protect customers from exploits at the application layer. Any customer that wants that can go up to Microsoft.com/ISA to get information about the beta. But of course, if you're a customer of TechNet Plus, you'll automatically be getting the beta for ISA Server 2004. We've also done quite a bit of work on new tools to help deal with some of the recent issues around security at Microsoft. The first is a blaster removal tool. We got a lot of feedback from corporate customers and from consumers that they thought they were still infected by Blaster. So recently, we made available a new tool to detect and remove Blaster. That's available on the Download Center. You can find out information about that on Microsoft.com/security. In addition, we also made this available through Windows Update. So any customer that went to Windows Update as part of the automatic update process, we detected if you had Blaster running on your machine. In the case that you did, downloaded the tool and automatically ran it to remove Blaster from your system. Similarly, with MyDoom, we created a very similar tool to detect and remove the MyDoom infection from systems. These are, again, both available on Microsoft.com's Download Center, but also automatically through Windows Update. This tool became available on Windows Update over the weekend. We've actually had quite a bit of great success in removing MyDoom from systems that were infected. Again, for more information on any of these tools, please check out Microsoft.com/security. We've also made a lot of progress over the last 6 weeks or so on new guidance and training. Certainly, as we have Michael Howard here today to talk about writing secure code, it's appropriate that we have a great new developer security webcast set available. You can find the security webcasts on msdn.microsoft.com/security. We've also made a lot of the prescriptive guidance we've been talking about over the last few months available as well. I think the key thing we focused on here is making sure that the guidance is more prescriptive, but also more focused on key scenarios that you've told us are important to you. So for more information on this new security guidance, please go to www.microsoft.com/security/guidance. You'll also notice that we've gotten a lot of feedback that we need to have simpler URL names for this guidance, and I hope that we've responded to those requests. Third issue is training. We've talked about some new TechNet seminars that will be available. We began those last month, but really Over the course of February and March, we'll have a lot more volume of those seminars. Please go to Microsoft.com/security to find out about a TechNet seminar coming to a city near you. The other feedback we got from you was a need for more hands-on training around security. So we're very excited that our certified technical education centers, our CTECs, now have courses in security that include hands-on labs. So please be in touch with your local education center to get the opportunity to find the schedule for a security hands-on lab at a courseware center near you. Lastly, we got feedback that people wanted to be able to get our security guidance on CD-ROM. We'll be doing this frequently, updating the security guidance kits periodically, but the latest version of the security guidance kit is now available, and I encourage you to go up to Microsoft.com/security if you want to get a hard CD-ROM of the latest guidance and tools from Microsoft. I think that'll be a very helpful tool. Certainly a lot of you have asked for it, so we hope we're responding to that. Again, if you have feedback on any of this content, please feel free to send me some email, and I'll make sure that we get your questions answered and take your feedback. There have been a number of recent issues around security, and I wanted to just spend a few minutes talking about some of those issues so you can understand exactly what's going on from Microsoft and what our perspective is on those. Three big categories. The first is the MyDoom virus. Second is security patches. And the third is some new IE vulnerabilities you may have heard about. In terms of MyDoom, the key thing I want to emphasize here, this is an email-based social engineering worm. It's not an exploit of any vulnerability in Microsoft software. There have been several variants, including MyDoom A, MyDoom B, and some things that were called MyJuice variant A and B. If you go up to Microsoft.com/security/antivirus/MyDoom, you'll see some information with details at a technical level. The key thing here is that the AV vendors have rated this worm as a high. I think the key issue here is concerns around impact with both email and networks in terms of what MyDoom can do. Essentially how it works is it installs a Trojan on the targeted system with a backdoor. There was also variants that tried to attack both Microsoft.com and SCO, and I think both companies have done a good job of protecting their websites. The key thing to focus on here, I think, at your level, is to make sure that you are using the tools we made available to protect your systems, and of course, our advice to always use antivirus software to detect and protect your systems is important. It's also important to realize that because MyDoom does have this Trojan listening on an open port, that you continue to use firewall protection both at the edge of your network and also with machines that may be traveling out or connected directly to the internet to provide the highest level of protection. MS04004 was an IE cumulative patch that we released about 2 weeks ago. It was actually issued as an out-of-cycle cumulative security bulletin, primarily because we were aware of active exploits, in particular against the address bar spoofing vulnerability that was in Internet Explorer. The three vulnerabilities that we fixed in particular, in addition to that, were also the cross-domain vulnerability and a drag-and-drop vulnerability. And the key thing that we wanted to make sure was possible was that customers had the information they need and the technology they needed to protect themselves as quickly as possible. Because of the other issues that we included in the patch, beyond the address bar spoofing, this patch was rated with a maximum severity as critical. Certainly, the exploit vectors here are both HTML, email, as well as visiting malicious websites. We do recommend this patch for anyone using Windows with Internet Explorer because of the issue around address bar spoofing and the critical nature of this vulnerability. The second patch I want to spend a few minutes talking about is a patch we released last Tuesday as part of our monthly patch release process. This is a vulnerability to the ASN1 component of Windows, and essentially this is a vulnerability that in some circumstances could allow arbitrary execution of code on the system. This was fixed as part of responsible disclosure, and there were literally 0 days of elevated risk because the patch became available at the same time that we went public with the vulnerability. The impact here is certainly a maximum severity level of critical. The exploit vector here would be a network attack. I want to be very clear that while there is no known exploit in the wild today, we do think it's important that customers deploy this patch. All supported versions of Windows, except for Windows ME, do need to take this patch for ASN1, and I think it is a patch that you want to look at seriously in your environments. The last issue that I want to spend a few minutes talking about is the recent leak of Windows source code. And I know there's been a lot of news recently about the fact that some of our source code was illegally posted up on the internet. To help discuss some of these issues, I thought it would be valuable to bring Chris Jones of the Windows Core Operating System Division out to talk to me a little bit about what's going on and really what it means for customers. Chris, welcome.
Great to see you, Mike.
Thanks, Chris. So what's your role at Microsoft?
I'm the Corporate Vice President in charge of Program Management for the Core Operating Systems Division.
And in this role, you're responsible for?
In this role, recently we made a change where we have a group of people that builds the core operating system. So you can think about this as the foundation upon which our client and our server operating system products are built. So components like the networking stack and TCP/IP, the kernel, and others sit in the Core Operating System Division.
Great. Now, one of the questions we've heard a lot from customers is, how did the source get out there? Was the Microsoft network leaked? Did someone at Microsoft put software out in the internet against company policy? What happened?
Well, we're still working out the details, frankly, Mike, as you know, and we can't really comment on an active investigation. But we know at this point it wasn't a breach of our network or an employee of Microsoft's posting the source. We believe it came through another channel. As you know, we have some source licensing programs with other companies and customers, and we think it may have come through a channel like that.
So what versions of Windows are we talking about?
The source is for Windows NT 4, parts of Windows NT 4, and parts of Windows 2000.
And we're talking about a lot of the code, a little bit of the code?
It's just some components of the system. It's less than a quarter of the NT4 source as far as we can tell right now, and less than that for Windows 2000 as a percentage.
So I heard that IE is part of what's been leaked. Is that true?
Yes, that's true. In fact, we think it's most of the Internet Explorer components. The source has been leaked and available.
Now this code, you mentioned it was Windows NT4 and Windows 2000. How old is the source that's out there?
We believe it dates back from sometime in 2000, so it's between 3 and 4 years old. So it's code that it actually predates some of our most recent security pushes and security engineering practices.
So the version of Internet Explorer that's out there is?
It's somewhere in Internet Explorer 5, between 5 and 5.01.
So what does this mean for customers? Are they at risk?
We don't believe so, as long as they're current on the latest versions of Internet Explorer. We've been consistent with customers that in order to be the most secure, it's important to move to Internet Explorer 6, the latest service pack and the latest security patches, because that's the one that has our latest enhancements to security in it.
So what's Microsoft done with Internet Explorer since 5.0? It sounds like a lot's happened between 5.0 and SP6 and IE6 Service Pack 1.
Well, a couple things. First, it's 3 years of active development on the source, so many things can have changed between 5.0 and 5.5 and 6.0. But second, and more importantly, you remember that last year or 2 years ago, we did a major investment in Windows Group, where we took the whole engineering team and had them do an inspection of the source code and look at and address vulnerabilities. In addition, we have updated tools that really crawl and inspect our source code that help us figure out more vulnerabilities. So the combination of those two things, plus the increased training that your group has helped really lead in the company, have led us to have a higher degree of reliability in the code base and more design in for security. And those enhancements exist only in Internet Explorer 6, Service Pack 1, and the latest security patches. Although, as you know, we do backport some of those changes to previous versions of the browsers to try to keep our customers secure.
So what's your advice for customers?
My advice for customers is simply get to the latest version of Internet Explorer, whatever platform you're on, with the latest cumulative security patch.
So IE6 Service Pack 1 and this MS04 patch is cumulative for all security issues between the release of SP1 and today.
That's correct.
How do I find out what version of IE I'm running?
It's very simple. You can go to Help in the About box, and it'll tell you exactly the version you're running, including the Service Pack version.
If I'm an enterprise and I want to upgrade my environment to Windows, so IE6 Service Pack 1, what's the best way to do that?
Well, really the best way to do that, it depends on what deployment technology you're using. If you're using software update services, Internet Explorer works great with that. If you're using SMS or other deployment technologies, you can deploy Internet Explorer through that means. Or if you're using none of those technologies, you can use the Internet Explorer Administrator's Kit, which is a solution we built to allow customers to easily and quickly deploy the browser and upgrade it in their environments.
If I'm a consumer, is that for me to get IE6, is that free or something I have to pay for?
If you're a consumer, small business, or anyone running a supported version of Windows, Internet Explorer 6 is free to you. And if you have trouble downloading it, you can actually order a CD from our website and we'll mail it to you.
And you go to Microsoft.com/Windows/IE and I find out how to order the CD.
That's right.
Very cool. What mitigation is available? If I'm an enterprise customer using IE5 and I haven't had a chance to upgrade to IE6, maybe I'm working on that. Are there things I should do to protect my environment?
Yeah, Mike, there are. With Internet Explorer, we designed in a concept called security zones, which actually lets you enable or disable particular features of the browser depending on the site you're browsing to. So, for example, I can set up my Internet Explorer configuration today in IE4 and higher to actually not allow things like scripting or controls or other advanced technologies in most sites, but only allow them to the targeted sites in my corporate intranet where I want that kind of behavior to exist. So it's very flexible, and it allows you to actually lock or restrict usage of the browser depending on the scenarios you want to use. You can keep taking advantage of the richness of the features while limiting your exposure when your customers or your employees are browsing the corporate internet.
So full functionality of places that I trust, and if there's places I'm going where I maybe trust less, I can lock down that functionality.
That's correct.
Now, Chris, I heard yesterday there was some rumors about a hacker on the internet who used the source code to find a vulnerability in IE5. Is that something that as a customer of IE6 I should be worried about?
That vulnerability does not exist in the latest version of Internet Explorer 6 Service Pack 1, plus the latest security patches. So if you're at the latest version, you shouldn't be worried about that vulnerability. If you're not, we of course are working, as is our policy, on patches that will be made available to previous versions of the browser.
Now, why is that not available? Why is that vulnerability not exploitable in IE6?
Because as a result of our inspection of the code and the security practices that you and I discussed, we found that vulnerability and fixed it in IE6 already.
So essentially, we've done a lot of work between IE5 and IE6 to make sure customers are safer and more secure.
That's exactly right.
Very cool. Anything else? Advice for customers?
We just want to make sure that we get them to the latest secure version of the browser, and also want to help them along the way. So if there are things that we can do at any time to help in migration to the latest version of Internet Explorer, or questions we can answer, we want to know about them. And my email is chrisjo@microsoft.com. I'd be happy to take any questions from customers either on the website or offline.
So one last important question. Do you think that the source code leak makes it easier for hackers to attack Internet Explorer?
I can't really speculate on that. I mean, we think that we found the vulnerabilities that exist in the source code that are transparent to code inspection because we've done the code inspection. But we are definitely doing due diligence to look again at the source and see if anything else pops to mind.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks,
very
Mike.
helpful. Now I'd like to invite my next guest to join us, Michael Howard, who is a security engineering and program manager at Microsoft and a veteran security expert, as well as the author of the authoritative guide on writing secure code, aptly entitled Writing Secure Code, now in its second edition and available from Microsoft Press. Welcome, Michael, and thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Mike.
So what is the overall strategy for writing secure code at Microsoft? What's the history been about writing secure code at the company?
So some time ago, there was a small number of us within Microsoft, a tiger team, if you like, who focused on looking at products from a design perspective, from a coding perspective, looking for vulnerabilities. We were sort of the center of excellence for finding security bugs. The problem there is that most people coming out of school really don't know how to build secure software. It's not a skill that's sort of readily taught today.
Right.
And so we instigated a lot of education, a lot of training, made sure people were aware of the security issues, and so we could scale the whole process across the whole of Windows.
So essentially, in the past, there was a small team trying to go in and make it all right, and you realized that you need to have everyone at the company working about security.
Absolutely. So we instigated a lot of training that we put developers through, and we trained in excess of 15,000 engineers at Microsoft. And ultimately, that led to David and I writing secure code, just documenting the things that we'd found.
So you and David LeBlanc actually built the curriculum for Microsoft to train our own engineers.
Absolutely.
And the book is really about making sure that people outside Microsoft can benefit from that learning.
You bet, yeah.
Now, there's a framework you often talk about in terms of how we make our products more secure. Can you talk a bit about that framework?
Sure. It's called SDQ plus C, or Secure by Design, Secure by Default, Secure in Deployment, and finally Communications. And it's really a set of things that you have to think about when you're building secure software. You can't just sort of say, yeah, we're using SSL, we're secure. There's a lot more to building secure software than just that.
So what's Secure by Design all about?
So Secure by Design revolves around two main aspects. One is reducing vulnerabilities in code. That involves reducing vulnerabilities in currently shipping code. And that's really the purpose of these security pushes that have been going on at Microsoft. Is stop what you're doing, looking for security defects.
So like the work Chris mentioned for IE6.
Absolutely. And but the most important aspect is reducing the chance of people injecting vulnerabilities into the code in the first place. That's the critical part of Secure by Design. The other part of Secure by Design that's very important is this thing called threat modeling, which is understanding the threats to the system. We have a very rigorous method, which is documented in the book, about how to analyze an application to understand the threats to the system and make sure that you have the appropriate mitigations in place as well.
So how does one do a threat model?
It's a fairly well-documented process. We've learned a lot about it in the last couple of years. But in a nutshell, you analyze the applications, find out the components that require protection. We like to use data flow diagrams. We're not married to them, but people like to use DFDs. And from that, you can work out the assets that require protection. And then you can understand the threats to the system in, we have this thing called STRIDE, which is the different threat categories.
STRIDE stands for?
Spoofing threats, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, and elevation of privilege. And once you understand that, so that the actual threats that these components are susceptible to, you can start choosing appropriate mitigations and calculating risk.
Interesting. And what is secure by default all about?
Secure by default is something I probably spend a good 60% of my time, if not more. I'm a big believer in secure by default. And this revolves mainly around turning unused features off or less used features off. A good example of this is IIS 6 in Windows Server 2003. When you install Windows Server 2003, IIS isn't even installed by default. And when you do choose to install it, it is essentially just a basic web server. And if you want ASP, you click on the button and you get ASP and nothing else.
So the features are there, they're just off by default because most customers may not be using them.
Absolutely.
And the theory there is if you're not using the feature, you shouldn't be attacked by the feature.
Correct. And quite often, if you have a feature that you don't even know is there, you may not be managing that feature either.
So is there a threshold you have for when something's on by default or not?
Yeah, we like to use sort of an 80-20 rule, which is, do 80% of your customers require this feature to be on by default? Do they use this feature by default? And if the answer is no, then you should seriously consider removing it or turning the feature off.
Sounds like a pretty major process change and a new discipline for the developers at Microsoft.
Absolutely, but people are warming to it. Yeah.
So what is secure and deployment all about?
Secure and deployment is really about tools and practice and guidance. Like, for example, the tools that you mentioned, MBSA and so on,
right,
and the prescriptive guidance that we're making available to developers and to system administrators and so on.
And secure communications, or security and communications?
I like to think of this as just being really involved in the community. You'll see a lot of us hanging out in the news groups, answering security questions, and many of us, even have weblogs as well.
Anderson, you have a blog on security up on MSDN now.
That's right, along with many other security people.
So what are the core skills that we should be teaching developers, testers, and designers, both inside Microsoft, but also with our customers? What should they be spending time on?
So that's actually a great question, and I actually get asked this question very regularly. I would say that there's probably 3 sets of skills which we've learned over the last couple of years. For developers, it is ultimately not trusting user input. If a good person can give you good data, a bad guy can give you bad data, and that may make your application fail. So the critical skill for developers there is just never trusting user input.
And user input's not just things from the keyboard, but other ways as well.
Network traffic, file traffic, I mean,
so if I send you a bad file, I could use that as a way to exploit your system.
Absolutely.
So how do you choose the appropriate security technologies to protect an application from attack? What would be your recommendation to a customer building an application?
It's funny, this is another question I get quite regularly, and my first response there is think about the threats. What is the threat that really worries you? And from that, in other words, that really comes from the threat model. If you understand what the threat is, you can choose the appropriate mitigation to mitigate that threat. A good design revolves around the threat model. Don't just sort of use some technology because you think it may protect you. You should really choose the appropriate technology driven by the threat model.
How do you protect a server application against something like a denial of service attack?
Denial of service attacks are actually very hard to protect against. But probably the single best practice by far is to authenticate the end user. If you look at distributed denial of service attacks, they're all anonymous. You don't know where they came from. They may even be spoofed IP addresses. You don't know. But if you authenticate the user, then you immediately raise the bar because the person connecting to you must be a valid account or a valid user on that machine.
So why are there so many buffer overruns in the software industry?
Yeah, buffer overruns are still, account for about 1/3 of the defects from any software vendor. And there's a number of reasons for this. There's a lot of C and C++ code out there. I mean, C and C++ code allows you to have direct access to memory. And this is the reason why it's such a powerful language, and this is the reason why people use the language. The downside of that is you can get buffer overruns. The other reason is there's lots of code that was written, say, 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago when there were different threats. And now that code is being hooked up to the internet where threats abound. And The other reason is that there are new kinds of attacks that can lead to buffer overruns that people may not have even known about 3-4 years ago. So it's an evolving threat landscape.
So you mentioned that C and C++, because they have such access to the hardware, the power there can become a point of risk as well. Do other techniques like using managed code, using C# and VB.NET fix the buffer overrun issue?
It certainly prevents you from having buffer overruns in your code. It substantially raises the bar. You should be aware of one thing, though. Managed code certainly helps you write more productive and cleaner code. It's essentially buffer overrun free. But be very wary if you've got code that is calling out to unmanaged code, for example, which is common. People like to call out to their dynamic link library. But if that's written in C and C++, you may have a buffer overrun in there.
So with the combination of using managed code, C# and VB.NET with libraries that have been through a thorough review is probably the safest approach.
Absolutely.
Are there any signs of progress around any of this? Are we making progress at Microsoft?
Yeah, I believe we are making progress. I've actually seen good progress. If you look at the first, say, 270 days of the release of Windows 2000 and Windows Server 2003, in the first 200...
Comparing the two products after the first
Correct.
270 days.
So in case of Windows 2000, we had around 56 or so security bulletins, and in the first 270 days of Windows Server 2003, we had 16.
So 56 goes to 16.
Correct. But what's most important there is that not only did the number shrink from Windows Server 2003, but also the overall severity shrank as well. We reduced the number of criticals and importance, and that's a direct reflection of secure by default, reducing the attack surface of the product.
So how many criticals and importance did Windows 2000 have?
It was in excess of 30.
And Windows Server 2003?
6.
So a lot of progress.
Yeah, a lot of progress.
In terms of reducing the severity. If a customer wanted to to get involved in writing secure code, make sure their staff was more able to write secure code, what are some of the advice you'd have for them?
Other than buying the book.
There you go.
Go to Microsoft.com
Right.
and look for a course called the Security Seminar for Developers, course 2805. If you query for that, it's essentially an instructor-led course derived from writing secure code.
That's taught at RC Techs.
Correct.
It's a combination of the book, which I guess everybody in development at Microsoft has to read now.
You bet.
Combined with this course, which is essentially the same curriculum you use to train our staff here at Microsoft.
Yep.
Michael, thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Appreciate it. We're going to take a brief pause, and when we come back, Chris, Michael, and I will get together and answer questions from the audience. So please go to the UI and click on the Q&A button and send your questions in, and we'll get them answered for you just as quickly as possible. We'll take a break now. Well, great. We've got some great questions back, and Michael and Chris are back joining me. If you have more questions, I do want to encourage you to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of the UI to ask any questions. First question we've got comes from, actually, I don't know where it comes from. Is there a possibility that the Windows source code was leaked through Microsoft's shared source initiative or the government security program? And if so, would this cause you to make changes to the program? And we should have been more clear about that in the earlier part of our discussion, but I want to be very clear now. The recent source, although it is an ongoing investigation, the recent source code leak, to the best of our knowledge, was neither a result of a breach in the Microsoft corporate network, nor was it related to any of our shared source programs, either the shared source initiative or the government security program. Both of these programs have been very useful in helping us to get feedback on our products, but also have very clear legal and authorized fashion for how individuals and organizations participating in shared source and the government security program work. So we are very much reaffirming our support of both the shared source initiative and the government security program. We think there's good practices in place there, and really there's we were very sure that this is not the source of the leak of this source code. The second question comes from Craig Shaw. Craig asks, when will SMS 2003 be updated for MBSA 1.2? We're right now currently working on it. This should ship sometime in March, but we've also made sure that we get the quality right. So the delay here, once I get the MBSA tool out there, but have some work to make sure we get the quality at the level you expect us to do with MBSA 1.2 and SMS 2003. Hanny Fairs asks, why was there not more broad communication regarding MS04004? This, by the way, was the cumulative patch for Internet Explorer. Also, the change in functionality of the clear text authentication feature of Internet Explorer. This has caused at least one major application to malfunction at our site. Instead of this change to be obscurely mentioned in a bulletin, my expectation would have been a more broader communication to take place to corporate customers. Haney, this is a great question. Maybe we've got to do a better job here, but I do want to be clear that we did send out an alert to our priority support services as well as to our field personnel about a week before the patch went out. We also highlighted the fact that we would have some incompatibilities introduced with the patch up on our website, msdn.microsoft.com. If you have a Premier support contract, your Premier person should have let you know about this. But if they didn't, please send me some mail. Also, it would be great if you would check out the MSDN site to give us feedback about how we positioned it up there. If we think we've got to do a better job there, let me know. And again, my email is mikenash@microsoft.com. I also want you to be aware that we published, previous to the patch, a knowledge base article on the topic that's available. Your best bet is to go find it up on MSDN. If you can't find it, let me know. The knowledge base article was 834489. If you go up to the PSS, support.microsoft.com, and do a search for KB article 834489, you'll see exactly what we said prior to the release of MS 04004. Kenji Yamamoto asks, what is your current plan on releasing scanning tools like MBSA, updated regularly like the current version of 1.2 to 2x in the near future? Kenji also made the additional comment, thank you for deciding to release the localized version of MBSA. We Japanese engineers have long wished, with the localized UI, we feel that the Japanese engineers can now use it with ease. First of all, thanks for the feedback. We definitely realize the importance of having MBSA available to a broader set of our customers, and certainly getting this localized was an important priority for us. We plan to keep building tools to scan for security patches and any other tools we can help, like the Blaster tool, like the MyDoom tool, to help customers keep their systems safe and secure. We're right now working on our plan for exactly how we'll ship these tools. I'd also like to add that in addition to localizing the tool in Japanese, we've also localized MBSA in French and German. And again, if you want more details or you want to download MBSA 1.2, you can go to microsoft.com/MBSA and get access to all the latest information about MBSA as well as get to the download. Rafael Rosado asks, Mike, I think the MBSA is a good tool, and I have suggested to some folks in the MBSA development team that it would be an even greater tool if it provided a user community to use it would be an even greater tool if it provided the user community to some of the security policies established at Microsoft and others, such as the Center for Internet Security and the NSA, to select and define a baseline security template against which target systems will be evaluated against and report deviations from the template. Is this something we can expect to see with future versions of MBSA? So we are right now working to define the exact functionality, but these exact scenarios are certainly things we've gotten feedback on and really the direction we're going. Scanning against specific security templates such as Windows security guides for Windows 2000, Windows XP, and Server 2003 are certainly on the table. Right now we're trying to figure out the best way to do that in a way that both solves the issue but also can be customized to address the exact needs that you may have in your environment. Liam Gladdy asks, I've been reading about the ASN1 patch, but when I run it on my system, I get an invalid service pack error. I'm running Windows XP Service Pack 2. I'm a beta tester. Is this patch included already in SP2? A great question. First of all, thanks for being a beta tester and giving us feedback on SP2. The update does not stall on XP Service Pack 2. The XP Service Pack 2 beta does contain the changes to the ASN1 file called msasn1.dll that was generally released as part of MS04-007. So you're all set and protected from that. And I have more questions coming. Excellent. Thank you. Peter Shepler asks a question for Michael. Can you talk more about using data flow diagrams to determine the components that need protection?
Yeah, the DFD process is relatively well understood. It's very well documented. You basically take a very high-level view of the application, and you sort of drill down. It's a very hierarchical method for drilling down into multiple processes and so on. The main thing that comes out of a DFD are the data stores, where the data is stored, the data flows between the entities and processes that process the data, and also the external influences that you have on the data and on the application itself. So there's actually many books and many websites that actually document the process for doing DFDs. We've augmented it slightly to include trust boundaries, which are very security specific. If the question is not answered, if you don't think the question is answered appropriately or not fully documented in Writing Secure Code, or
Chapter 4, I believe.
Chapter 4 of the book. You read the book too, Mike?
I have. Great. Another question for you, Michael. What's Microsoft doing to identify, patch, and eventually prevent buffer overrun-related security threats?
That's a great question. Buffer overruns can be mitigated and they can be removed, and we're working on both. First of all, in the area of removing issues, it's through education, it's through security pushes, security reviews, finding issues, fixing them, and so on. Also using safer string handling functions. For example, there was a set of libraries that we created during the Windows security push called StirSafe, which is available up on MSDN, and it's also now available in Visual Studio.NET 2003. But also it includes things like compiler improvements. You may have heard of the GS flag, which helps us detect certain kinds of stack-based buffer overrun at runtime. We're now in our third generation, and we're now compiling the operating system with the third generation. It includes things like protection of heap data. And finally, in Windows XP Service Pack 2, we include things like the NX support for certain types of CPUs, where we can mark the page data in the heap and in the stack as no execute. So even if you can get a payload onto the stack, you can't execute it. But that's more of a mitigation. So we're working on removing defects and not injecting defects, but also adding these mitigations as well, just in case something falls through the cracks.
It is a combination, though, both of quality. And I know, Chris, you're working a lot on the Windows XP Service Pack 2 project. Some things going on in SP2 to help make customers safer and more secure?
Absolutely, a bunch of things we're doing. And basically, I mean, Michael outlined the approach, but we want to make sure that we're at all layers in the system, really making sure that we've done the best we can to secure, so that it's not just code inspection, it's not just analysis of data flow, but it's also looking at the issues that get reported and thinking about ways we can provide high-level mitigations. NX is one great example of those. The other is the Internet Connection Firewall in Windows XP SP2, where really we just make it so that nothing can get onto the system through ports by turning off ports, or the work in Internet Explorer that we're doing in XP SP2, really looking at the general class of vulnerabilities that have been found and trying to think about higher level places where we could mitigate against those vulnerabilities ever happening.
So looking more at the attack vector really than key vulnerabilities.
Well, and actually the combination, I think, is the most important. Making sure we look at vulnerabilities on one side and attack vectors on the other, because it's security by depth that we want to do. We want to make sure at every layer in the system we're as secure as we can possibly be.
Excellent. We have another question about the new IE vulnerability called Ibiza, and really what's going on there. The answer is that we are now investigating public reports of a malicious attack exploiting some vulnerabilities in Internet Explorer that were known as Ibiza. The attack, as we understand it, can enable a malicious user to execute code on a computer system. We're actively investigating these reports to determine the appropriate course of action to protect our customers. This may including a fix as part of our monthly release process, or possibly an out-of-cycle patch, depending on customer needs and how quickly we can get a patch done. In the meantime, though, I do want to emphasize that customers can minimize the risk by increasing the security of their local machine zone in Internet Explorer. Steps are available to do this in a KB article numbered 833633. So I encourage anybody running a enterprise shop that wants to protect themselves from the potential threat of Ibiza to read KB article 833633. Questions keep coming. Excellent, thank you. Ann Patterson asks, notes, there's been some public criticism of the time lag between when you knew about the ASN1 vulnerability and when you released the patch. How do you explain 6+ months time lag between when Microsoft found out about the vulnerability and when we responded to it? I think the key thing, Ann, that we want to focus on here, I know this is a very hard thing sometimes to understand, especially when you look at the scope of the issues that we're dealing with at Microsoft, but is our security response requires a very delicate balance between speed and quality. As we've learned in the past, if we ship a patch too quickly, there's the risk that as a broad set of customers are using it, that patch may cause some degradation in functionality. In the case of the ASN1 vulnerability, this investigation required us to evaluate several aspects, instances of the way ASN1 was used around the product to make sure that as we fixed the vulnerability, we didn't cause a degradation in functionality. I also think it's very important to realize that this ASN1 vulnerability was reported to us under responsible disclosure. That means that the reporter of this vulnerability came to us confidentially, shared it with us, and there was never a time when the vulnerability was known about in the internet. And essentially, there were 0 days of risk because the public knowledge of the vulnerability coincided with the availability of the patch. As a result, we had a chance to do very good due diligence, deliver a high-quality patch to both educate and support our customers broadly and ensure that we were giving them a quality patch that would help protect them safely, so there'd be really no reason not to deploy the patch, which when you have quality issues is sometimes a problem. But a great question. I think we really do want to emphasize the fact that there was really 0 days of risk here. Joe Richmeyer asks, a couple of third-party security providers have indicated that the POC exploit code and publicly available exploit code for MSO4007 is available. Can you comment? Well, we are definitely aware of some public postings of proof of concept code that seems to demonstrate a denial of service attack against the ASN1 vulnerability. That said, we can't comment on this type of posting. We recommend that customers install the update. It really is the best way to be safe and secure. MSO4007 was rated as critical, and I think the reason for that is that we do see the potential for remote code execution. And as I said, there's now a proof of concept out there, which would encourage me as an IT manager to get MSO4007 rolled out as quickly as possible. The next question comes from someone named Lee. Lee has IE 6.0. How do I check if I have the first security patch? Sorry, have the first service pack? I have critical patches automatically downloaded.
The way to check, Lee, is to really go to the Help About box, and you can choose Help About and look in the version number, and it will tell you Internet Explorer 6, and if it has Service Pack 1, it will tell you Service Pack 1.
And of course, if a customer is using Windows Update in the consumer space, going to Windows Update and doing a scan on your machine is going to be a great way to verify what's happening there. I should say that IE6 Service Pack 1 will not show up as a critical update. You'll have to go to the recommended upgrades to download it. But it really is the easiest way for a consumer to make sure the machine is configured properly.
And the only other thing I'd say is if you're running Windows XP Service Pack 1, you already have Internet Explorer Service 6 Service Pack 1. So people who've moved there already get it in the product.
And also Windows Server 2003 included IE6 Service Pack 1 as well.
That's correct.
Excellent. So the only thing you want to do there is make sure you have the latest patches, and the easiest way to do that, of course, is to use either MBSA or Windows Update. Lee also asks, would you recommend that at least at least always installing the critical patches and maybe the others depending on the user? Lee, this is a great question. I think it's important, especially in the enterprise space, that customers evaluate every security bulletin and install it based on information about your environment. That said, when we give something a critical rating, it is because we believe that the vulnerability has the potential of putting your system at a higher risk, and therefore we recommend that people have a plan to deploy critical vulnerabilities. This is especially important in the consumer space, where I think there may be less expertise to decide whether to install or not install a patch. Our recommendation in the consumer space is to have the automatic update feature turned on by default. In fact, although I think I'm reasonable security expert in my home, I automatically download patches once a month. I never think about it because I've got other things going on in my life. I do also recommend that you follow the 3 steps outlined on Microsoft.com/security and on the Microsoft.com/protect site. And we certainly recommend that customers, first and foremost, use a firewall. There's a great firewall built into Windows XP called Internet Connection Firewall, but third-party firewalls are also very effective as well. We also recommend that customers install and maintain their antivirus software. It's important that we not only use AV software, but realize you're only going to be protected if you have the latest signatures installed on your system. There's no way that AV software can know about new vulnerabilities if you don't have the signatures installed. And lastly, it is important to stay up to date on security patches. Certainly, by moving to the monthly release, we hope we've reduced some of that burden. We've also created some great tools like software update services, like Windows Update and SMS. But to the extent you can automate this process, you'll certainly take a lot of the pressure off your teams to deal with security vulnerabilities, security exploits as they potentially become available in the wild. And then there was another question. If I have Windows XP Service Pack 1, do I have IE 6.0 Service Pack 1? The answer, Chris has already answered, is absolutely yes. Next question is, what operating systems are supported by MBSA version 1.2? MBSA 1.2 can be installed and run on Microsoft Windows 2000 Server, Windows 2000 Professional, Windows XP Home Edition, Windows XP Professional, Windows Server 2003. The tool can be run over the network against Windows NT4 Server and Windows NT4 Workstation, as well as the other products, including Windows 2000 Client and Server, Windows XP Pro and Home Edition, and of course, Windows Server 2003. Note that Windows NT4 systems can be scanned locally when running MBSA using the MBSA command line interface, which is mbsacli.exe/hf. Note that MBSA does not run on or against systems running Windows 95, Windows 98, or Millennium. SZ asked the question, writing secure code talks a lot about the DP API to protect secret data locally. What about key pair containers? Are they secure, and how?
Key pair containers are protected by the operating system. There is secret data that's held in LSA to access that data. And in some instances, DP API is used to protect certain data as well. But ultimately, yeah, it's protected by the operating system using a thing called the Local Security Authority, or LSA.
Great. And SZ has another question. So when I access the file with the container, which is accessible quite easily, is the data in it encrypted?
Depends on how the key is accessed. If you can access the key as you, and normally the key would absolutely be protected. However, if you can run some malicious code, that malicious code can run as you, then it could, in theory, access the key material. So the secret there is, make sure you're up to date on virus signatures and so on and so forth.
Is there a recommendation for the programmer and the best ways to use the DP API?
Yeah, in very critical environments where you don't want anyone, even potentially malicious code, accessing the key material or anything protected with DP API, you have 2 other options. One is to always prompt, which means that a UI will pop up and say, hey, this application is trying to access this data. Are you sure you want that to happen? So if a virus tries to do it, you'll be warned immediately.
Right.
Another way of doing it is to also add what's called extra entropy in your application. That way, only that application can access the data stored by DP API, not some malware.
I'm guessing this is all documented well in very secure code?
It's kind of geeky, but yeah, it's all documented.
Excellent. Masood Maban asks, where do I find out the list services that are closed by default, sorry, the list of services that are closed by default and their app dependencies? We actually have covered these in a number of presentations on security improvements in Windows Server 2003. If you go to http://webcast and search for the webcast called Security Improvements in Windows Server 2003, you'll find a presentation that covers this. I also believe there's a KB article. I don't know the number of it, but Masood, if you email me, I will reply back with the KB article that has the list of services that are on or off by default.
There's also a document outlining all the changes as well.
You know where that is?
It's the same document name, but if they email you.
Email me and I'll get you the document back, and I apologize for not knowing that off the top of my head. Dinesh Madine asks, is it possible for Microsoft to secure the Windows code? I mean, Windows installation, because if you see many of the security threats these days, they make use of the Windows loopholes and also overwrite some of the Windows files. Sometimes they make use of registry settings. Can Microsoft take steps for this?
There's actually one very simple step that people can take to protect their systems from any kind of attack that may overwrite operating system files or even the registry. And that is the notion of least privilege, in other words, running as a non-administrator. In Windows NT and beyond, the user is not the operating system unless the user is an administrator. So if you're not an admin, then you can't write over the registry or over portions of the OS. You just can't do it. The operating system prevents you from doing that.
There's a lot of things we're doing to make our products more secure by default to protect against these things.
Yeah, I mean, there are protections in these critical system files actually built into the OS where we will detect if these files have been tampered with, and will automatically put the good ones back. The untampered one versions, and that's been available since Windows 2000. It's called System File Protection.
What about guidelines to help customers to run their systems more securely?
There's guidelines available on Microsoft.com. If you you can email me. I can give you the details about.
And actually, up on Microsoft.com/technet/security, I know there's some great hardening guides that went up there recently as well.
Correct.
So I think the combination of work we're doing to make the system more secure out of the box, with new versions in particular, like the work we're doing in SP2, along with hardening guidelines for older systems, will be effective as well. But Microsoft.com/technet/security is a great place to go get information about how to use our products. And we're trying to make these much more prescriptive to show you how to solve key problems rather than giving you a review of all the features, which is a pretty big change for us. Rod Larson asks, can you recommend any automated tools for security code review?
For managed code, there's really two buckets, managed and unmanaged code. The biggest one by far for managed code is a tool called FXCOP, which is available on got.net.com. Just query for FXCOP. And it really documents a lot of the best practices that we have for developing secure managed code.
What does FXCOP do exactly?
It will looks at the assembly, the actual exe itself.
Right.
And because managed code is sort of self-describing, we can actually look at the assembly itself and look at some of the semantics of the assembly and say, you know, you're overusing some types of permissions. We can actually look at the assembly itself and actually say that's not really a good programming practice. You should consider doing it this way instead. In fact, it should be part of anyone who's building any code in managed code. They should be running this tool very, very regularly.
What about the application verifier tool that comes with the platform SDK?
There's an app verifier tool. It's available also on Microsoft.com, msdn.microsoft.com, and it will actually inject itself between the application and the operating system and look for what it considers to be insecure practices. There's a document also available if you go to msdn.microsoft.com, whack columns, whack secure.asp. There's an article that I wrote in my Code Secure column at the beginning of the year, actually the end of last year, that documents how to use App Verifier for looking for security vulnerabilities. And shortly we expect to have an update to App Verifier that looks for even more security vulnerabilities as the code is running.
So Delia Rajabov asks, what does the MyDoom virus actually do to my computer? Does it steal some of my information? And Delia, it's a great question. The known MyDoom and Doom juice worms themselves do not steal information, but they do open back doors, which could place another program on your machine, which could potentially run and do things as you described. The best advice we have for customers to protect themselves against future infection from MyDoom, but also perhaps from existing infection, is first and foremost to make sure you've got antivirus software installed. Make sure that your antivirus software is up to date. Also, having a firewall turned on will block access to the Trojan running on the system. Lastly, if you go up to Microsoft.com/security/antivirus/MyDoom, you'll find access to tools that can both detect to see if your machines have been infected, but also clean out those machines in the case that they have. So I really do very strongly recommend these three-step course of action. And of course, if you're using Windows Update or software update services, you can automatically deploy these tools to scan and remove MyDoom across the enterprise or in a small business or consumer space. I think we're out of questions. I want to thank you for joining us today. I hope this webcast has been useful in updating you on the new security tools and resources, but also give you an update on things we know about security at Microsoft. I also want to make sure you've got the guidance that you need, including information on how to write secure code. Your feedback is very, very important to us, so please fill out the webcast evaluation on the bottom of the screen so we can keep improving our efforts to give you the information that helps you keep your environments safe and more secure. And again, at any time, please feel free to contact me directly. My email is Mike Nash, that's MikeNash, at Microsoft.com, with your comments, feedback, and suggestions at any time. Also, I want to invite you to join me next month for our next monthly webcast. It'll be held Tuesday, March 16th at 8:30 a.m. Pacific time. I'll have another update for you on our security progress, and we'll be talking as well to General Manager Eric Lockhart, who runs the Emerging Security Technology team here at Microsoft. Eric will talk to us about security assessment tools, which, by the way, was the #1 topic you said you wanted to hear about in our poll last month. I look forward to seeing you next month, and also want to remind you that this webcast is available on demand anytime you want to watch it or show it to someone else. It's there, and I look forward to seeing you all next month. Thanks very much.